is not in the success equation. Prayer is in the revelation equation. Decision making is in the success equation. You have to make a decision and be sound. We have to be disciplined and make sure we go and get what God has called us to get. You can be full of the Holy Ghost, but you can still be ignorant. But as for me and my house, I will get understanding. I will get understanding. I will get understanding. It's time now for us to rise up and be counted.
Hello, everybody. I'm excited today. This is a great day indeed, and we've got a father in the house, a global leader, a man whom I've known for over 20 years. In fact, Bishop actually married me about 22 years ago, believe it or not. So he's a man I hold very dear to my heart. And, for those of you who don't know Bishop, Bishop is the founder and overseer of Jabula New Life Ministries. He's also the senior pastor of New Life Covenant Church. Bishop is an author. He's a mentor to many ministers and pastors around the world. He's the chairman of the Council of African Apostles, which is a body that mentors and guides leaders around Africa, and is also responsible for addressing issues on the African continent. Bishop is married to Chichi Bismark, and they've been married for over 38 years now. And Bishop is a global speaker for major conferences around the world, for people like T.D. Jakes, the Redeemed Christian Church, where he speaks to over 1 million people at a time. So we are really honored today to have Bishop. And Bishop, I welcome you. Thank you for gracing us and honoring us today. And our entrepreneurs are excited, and we really look forward to tapping into your wisdom and the things that you're going to be sharing with us today. So we are very excited. I just want us to watch a video clip quickly before I carry on. So if we can have that video clip play, and I'll come back in a minute or two.
The Zambian government, Bishop, sold the copper mines in northern Zambia to an outside consortium for $25 million. The copper mines for $25 million because they couldn't manage to keep them. The company that came in and took over the Zambian copper mines in 3 months made a profit of $75 million. They did not pay the Zambian government upfront in cash for the mines. They were going to pay them over a period of time. Here we have this company that has an understanding of how things work, raised the money at the government's expense, took money that the company the government should have been making, and gave it back to the government and said, we paid our debt in full, and give them now 0.006% of the proceeds of copper mining. When right outside the door there's people in poverty, people in not eating, people ignorant, people dying, high levels of AIDS, and what's the deal? Churches are full, people are praising God, Africans pray all night. Prayer is not in the success equation. Prayer is in the revelation equation. Decision making is in the success equation. You have to make a decision and be sound. We have to be disciplined and make sure we go and get what God has called us to get. You can be full of the Holy Ghost, but you can still be ignorant. But as for me and my house, I will get understanding. I will get understanding. I will get understanding. It's time now for us to rise up and be counted. This year, the country of Ghana turns 50. Ghana was born the same year we were born, in 1957. Ghana and South Korea had their independence dates on the same day, the same year. But look where South Korea is. South Korea is by nature not a Christian nation. South Korea by nature are Buddhists. China, which is the next large world economy, they have stated that in the next 10 years, 20% of the Chinese people will be multimillionaires. That means almost...
Wow, wow. Bishop, you're most welcome. I think just listening to that clip, it says a million things. And I think you really shattered a lot of mindsets and, and you really spoke into some of the issues that the church believers have been grappling with for many years. I mean, a lot of Christian business people don't understand why they're not seeing the kind of results that the sinners are seeing, and yet they're praying all night and doing all kinds of things, which is not bad, but there seems to be a missing link. And I believe we are in a time and an age where it's very critical for us to address these issues head on and allow the Christian businessman, the Christian entrepreneur to rise to the forefront. And that's part of why we've created this platform, to be able to empower Christian business people and entrepreneurs with the necessary wisdom to be able to have them go out there and do what they're supposed to do, And I think you said something significant there. You said it's time for us to rise and be counted, because we haven't been counted. We've been the Christians have been the guys that have been looked down upon. And so, Bishop, thank you once again. And I just want to give you the platform to speak to us, especially during this time. There's the coronavirus. People don't know what to do. Companies are going down. Bishop, we want to tap into your wisdom today. Please speak to us, sir.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Walter, and to everybody listening. I recall preaching that message at Bishop Jakes' church some years ago. And one of the things that was brought to my attention was the fact that the day before I'd had a meeting for Black entrepreneurs. And there was a gentleman there, his name was, we called him Brother Roberts. He was probably about 55 years old. And he was talking about the hotel industry in the United States. Said that there were like over 25,000 hotels, and 75% of all the hotels in the United States were owned by Indian Asians who had traveled from India in the last 10 years with barely $100 in their pockets, and yet they own over 20,000 hotels. And he said African Americans have been there for 400 years, and barely 150 hotels were owned by African Americans, And he was in that conversation, we talked about the challenge that people of color have. But from our side, when we became Christians, this year is 48 years that I will have been born again, and preaching for 46 years. And the church I joined, a Pentecostal church, it was not permitted to be a Christian and be in business. They did not encourage it. They said the two don't mix. In fact, if you were a business person, you were either told you had a demon or that you were a crook, and business people were never really trusted. And so naturally, my mom, her whole family were entrepreneurs. I was developing into some sort of an entrepreneur, but all of that was taken away from us. And when I became a full-time pastor with strong missionary influence, we were forbidden until a missionary had come in that was very innovative, and he himself had a couple of shops, and that's how we started slowly, but very limited, got into some sort of business. And so I think for African people, we lost almost 3/4 of the 20th century just to strictly church and no business. But as we began to come towards the 21st century, the last decade, the last 15 years, as God began to raise up significant African voices, men like Benson, Eleyosa, and Bingu, etc., Sengwayo in Bulawayo, they began to attract large numbers of people, significant amounts of revenue started coming through those churches. And the wise thing to do was to invest the money and create business opportunities. And watching from that angle, at first, said individuals were really stigmatized and weren't given much consideration as legitimate leaders and pastors. They were called crooks and all of that. But then, as understanding began to come, and as a demographic of younger people that had been through good schools, university and so on, the whole demographic began to change. Because even in fact, it goes further than that. Going to university was almost forbidden. Playing professional sports was forbidden. And so a whole generation, 2 or 3 generations were lost.
Wow.
And so when we finally started coming into our own as adults and started coming into business, it was at that time, Zimbabwe was still in an apartheid system, almost as bad as South Africa. And so that white community wouldn't let people of color into business space. And there was very little one could do in terms of business. And after independence in Zimbabwe, late great President Mugabe began to put incentives for Black people to get money and obtain businesses, and began to buy businesses. The challenge then became a lack of experience, no knowledge, not fully knowing how to run a business and run it well. And then many leaders that came into government found themselves in top positions, from a government minister to maybe a CEO of a top parastatal, and didn't understand the value of what they were running, how to run it, the value of equipment. I was working for a television studio, and a lady dropped a lens, and the CEO of the company went crazy because the lens was, the cost of the lens was the cost of half the building. The lens cost $500,000, and the building was $1 million. And he was so angry. And so the appreciation of the cost of things, and then also maintenance. So there's a whole bundle of things I've thrown out there that have caused Africans to be really slow on the uptake. And so I'll just basically start to say that business was not part of what we were doing. We were drunk, it was drummed into our heads that we were at best servants, at best second, third, fourth tier leaders. That's the best we could do. Management jobs were not made available. If you became an assistant manager, you were then probably some part of a privileged group. If you were in my class of people, you could only do 1 of 2 degrees. That was a teaching degree and possibly law. Other disciplines and faculties, our people weren't permitted to enter into. And then if you opened a business, you could only do a grocery store, or you could have some sort of a second-rate butchery, or mend a bicycle. But it was very unusual for one to have a good quality store or shop. Manufacturing was out of the question. Farming was out of the question. Cattle ranching, definitely not. If you worked, you worked on the railways, you were usually working as a plate layer, which was running the rail tracks and making sure the tracks were right, and making sure signals work. But the higher jobs were never given to people of color. And then money was not available. When I turned 25, I started working at Barclays Bank, and I tried to get a job there. I got a job as an inquiries clerk. And Teach and I were just getting married, and we wanted to buy a house. We were not eligible because my salary was $88 a month. But there was a white lady who was younger than I was. She was white. She was single. Her salary was much more than mine. She had a lesser job than I did. And she bought a bigger house than we were trying to buy because money was made easier for, white people. And so getting access to money was difficult to get. And when you did get it, it was very expensive. And it's the road to getting into business pre-independence and then post-independence was very, very difficult. There were a handful of individuals that broke through and came into big money. Some of the returning, freedom fighters, some activists that came back to Zimbabwe that were activists out of the country were given allowances and acquired good jobs, got great businesses, but again, were behind. And instead of investing significant revenue into the business, the first generation of men that came into independence, I'm speaking on a bit Zimbabwe's perspective now, Zambia too, has started buying things, houses, cars, bling, and never really put money into the business itself, for the business to reinvent itself, for the business to grow and become an enterprise. They remained like mom and pop shops instead of becoming institutions. And many of the CEOs that were running parastatals or mining interests began to, unfortunately, mismanage the business, redirect the revenues, and never put back into the business, and lost many years, and businesses had to close as a result of that. And so 20 years after independence, a new generation of young people come through. They have a better mind. They think differently. It's an integrated society. They've seen the failures of the first independent bunch. Now they want to start investing and putting money into things that are worthwhile, beginning to understand how money works. Secondly, gets a lot of exposure, is able to travel to various countries and begin to meet men and women in the same class or age group who are doing better with less, and begin to make comparisons with countries and men and women in their age group in those countries, how they're advancing, and how that these countries are investing in their people and not in things. It's just unfortunate that Africa has still to invest in its people and invest in infrastructure as opposed to in individuals, and using money for self and enamored by things like cars and houses that don't make sense. And so businesses are not going to grow that way, especially if we don't go into manufacturing, we don't go into exporting, and we spend a lot of time importing things that don't make sense. Glad to see that there's a slow turn in some countries, Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, and Rwanda are beginning to make a slow turn into manufacturing. South Africa needs to hold its keel and will get there or stay there. But the rest of Africa isn't doing well because we're thingified and we don't have an investment culture.
Right. Bishop, that's so powerful what you're saying. Now, I want to just ask, for the sake of entrepreneurs listening, why is it so important? Well, maybe let me say first, what is in your view the role of business or entrepreneurship, in not only in society but vis-a-vis the church, and affecting the issues that are around us that we see. So in your view, where do you put business and the role of business, right, in the scheme of things? And number two, dominion can, as the Bible has commanded us that we ought to have dominion, can we have dominion, without access to resources? And, can we have dominion without the means? You're speaking of manufacturing and all of this. What's dominion vis-a-vis, the entrepreneurs and the church? What's your view on that in terms of fulfilling what God expects of us to do?
Well, firstly, on the subject of dominion, dominion was not given to Christians. Dominion was given to human beings. The first human beings, Adam and Eve, were not Christians. They were given dominion over the whole earth.
Okay.
And all of their offspring were
Right.
given dominion.
Right.
And so when Adam and Eve sinned, they mortgaged the title deeds of the earth and the spirit of dominion to the demonic world. Satan actually held the title deeds of the earth, and he brags about that in Matthew chapter 4 and Luke chapter 4, when he says to Jesus, all this power I have, if you'll worship me, I'll give it to you.
Right.
But you'll see in chapter number 4 of the book of Genesis that the children of Cain were wiser because they saw a need and they met that need. Whereas Adam's offspring, first Abel, and then Abel got killed, and then Adam and Eve waited for another son, and he was Seth, and they were thrilled because they said, we now have a son from the Lord. So it appears then that the first family were looking for a spiritual entity without concentrating on what was needed for the sustenance and the well-being of mankind. And so the sons of Cain rather, they became the first entertainers. They invented instruments, musical instruments. They became engineers. They used copper and brass. They used foundries. They used ferrous metals and made alloys. They were builders. They built cities. And as a result of that, they created schools and they created trading. And so you find now, if I can say, the children of Adam are, just for conversation's sake, say the church now became dependent on someone that was driving the economy, someone that was setting the rules of money. And so they were subject to that. Right. And so God then, fast forward, Abraham is called out of Babylon. After the flood, there's this massive economic boom in Babylon. And the Babylonians are so smart. They're quick on their feet. They traders by nature. They use both the Tigris and Euphrates River and use those outlets to trade with the rest of the world. And they build magnificent palaces. They're trading as far as Ethiopia, bringing in gold. And God brings Abraham from Ur of Chaldees and brings him to Palestine, which is a piece of dirt. And there starts him from scratch and teaches him the principles on how to be wealthy, to put God first, and how to be wealthy. And Abraham starts by, firstly, his sacrifice and his worship to God. And then when he makes a covenant with God, the Bible says, when he agrees to go with God in Genesis 12, in Genesis 13 verse 2, the Bible says he's rich in cattle, silver, and gold. And then in Genesis 15, he makes a covenant with God. And after a great battle, he has so much loot from the battle, he pays a tithe to Melchizedek. So he's the first one to be a contributor. But he's not contributing as a tithe payer. He is what I call a kingdom provider, because he provides for everybody and just about anybody. And there's a difference between somebody that's just a tithe payer or gives offerings, and a provider. And so God says to Abraham, when he offers Isaac, he says, you know, I knew I could trust you. He said, but now I know I can trust you. In multiplying, I will multiply you. And in blessing, I will bless you. So here comes a man that is an entrepreneur that God raises up, makes him extremely wealthy. And this man puts God first, his family second. And then his son is trained the same way. God first, his family second. Jacob is trained the same way. These men are entrepreneurs. God blesses them and raises them up to become the wealthiest family, all three. And then you find that spirit going on Joseph. And eventually Joseph creates an entire economy where Egypt becomes a global economy. And the day after 430 years of slavery, the Jews leave Egypt. All of them leave with the gold and the spoils of that slavery, and every one of them are made wealthy. But even with that wealth, they are being trained and taught how to manage wealth through the disciplines of the tabernacle, the giving of tithes, giving to God what is God's, and investing in the land, and instructed how money works, how interest works. Don't charge each other interest, charge outsiders interest. And God even says, if you don't pay your tithe to me, you can use it, but next month you pay 1/5. So God introduces a usury, a type of interest on money loaned out. And so all of that, he's teaching them the principles, you know, how money must work. And money has to be used, and it has to be worked. It has to be invested in. And if you lose it, you seldom get a chance to get it back in the same momentum it gets. It has to be put to use. The man that buried his money, Jesus called him evil. So money must be put to use. It must be made to work. And in the way it's made to work, it is guaranteed to bring a return.
Right. Bishop, this is incredible. I mean, you've said a lot of deep truths. I mean, the first one there is, you know, there's a difference between a tither and a kingdom provider. And for me, what I pick up from that is that, you know, there's a purpose. There has to be a purpose behind one's money, you know. And I think last week when I was talking to the entrepreneurs, that's one of the things that we're emphasizing on, that usually money that's going to have an impact is money that has purpose tied to it. And the purpose that's tied to God is the highest purpose and the most profitable purpose when your money is tied to God. Now, you mentioned something that made Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob rich, and also the subsequent generations, even thereafter. You say they put God first, and then their family second, and that's very powerful. You know what you just said there. You know, and then also that money needs to be used. It must be worked. It must be put to use. So that's really profound, Bishop. So what you're saying to us is that there are principles that govern success. I think if I have to look at what you've just said, is success is not a chance game. It's something that has got foundations, it's got principles, and oftentimes there are spiritual laws and principles that actually determine the outcome of things. You know, can you maybe share a little bit more with us on that?
In 1978, I was introduced to a book written by George Clason. I recommend it all the time. I read it twice a year. And the book is entitled The Richest Man in Babylon.
Right.
And George Clason, in his book, it's a very simple read, is very, very, very powerful principles. Chapter number 5, for example, he teaches 7 cures for a lean purse. And in this very simple book, shows one how one can become a millionaire by doing simple things in 20 years. And he says, if you are 20 years old and you earn a certain amount of money, if you will put away 23% of your salary, after you turn 40, that money with interest calculated in a normal environment, not a crazy Zimbabwe environment, in a normal environment, that money with interest and compound interest should attract close to $1 million. And so from 1978, Cheech and I have been saving 18% of all our earnings. We do it with our personal earnings. Anything I earn, 18%, we don't touch. God gets his 10, we give an offering, but 18% goes away. We do that with the church. We do that with any of our businesses. We put away a minimum of 18%. Now, when that nest egg grows, that can then be used, converted into buying a decent asset, a property, a commercial property or something. And there we go again. As those businesses earn, we put away that reserve. It's so important. Joseph did it in Egypt. He put away 1/5 of all produce, 20% was put away. And if a person will do that consecutively and never touch that money and stick to that principle, they will grow wealth without even opening a business, really. Then with a business itself, a business must never run beyond its means. For example, we always teach that you shouldn't pay more than 22% of the earnings to salaries. If you're paying 22% and more to salaries, the business is doomed to fail, because 22% is too high. It's not sustainable, especially when the business is starting in the first 5 years, because you're going to need, besides the cash reserve you've taken out, you're going to need to plow money into that business. It would be better to pay less on salaries and more on work and overtime given than to be having a high turnover in salaries. And also, I think for especially young entrepreneurs in Africa, there's no need to start with everything brand new. You know, if you start basically with machinery that works, that's second or even third hand, eventually you'll get to the place where you can afford something that's new. Because guys get themselves into so much debt and into so much loss of money due to interest, and bank foreclosures are crazy, and guys fall before they even get to stand. And then I read another book that I think is also key. It's the Jewish phenomenon, 7 reasons why Jews prosper. It's called the Jewish phenomenon. And in that book, they teach how money actually works, how it must be rotated, how one must be giving a gift, because a gift in kind returns a gift in kind. And there's several principles in there. I'll try to dig those out for you, Walter, and make sure it's available. But it's called the Jewish phenomenon, why Jews will never ever be poor in the world, because they learn some things about revenue and finance. And it's really important that one be very, very disciplined, especially if you are going to maintain generational wealth. You have to be disciplined. You must only buy what you need and not what you want.
Wow, that's powerful. That's so difficult for a lot of people, isn't it? And it's discipline that's needed, that's gonna make the difference, and literally building a new culture and a new mindset, you know, in order to look after generations, you know. So I think this is we are in an age where there's a need for a paradigm shift. In order for us to have generations after us that are gonna, have meaningful impact. Otherwise, it's gonna be the same cycle over and over again. And we are in an age of high innovation right now. This is the digital age, and we are seeing that the giants that are emerging are mental giants. You know, they're guys who are thinking beyond just brick and mortar. These guys are creating things that are disrupting industries and markets and just shifting a whole economy overnight, you know. And so there has to be that mindset shift, you know. Now, Bishop, you know, there's people that say, you know, I'm a Christian, and you know, I battle with doing business with people of other religions, or they don't know what to do. Can they do a business with a Muslim, for instance, or should they look just for other Christians? And some say, you know, but I did business with a Christian and I lost my money because they were, you know, we didn't sign anything, and I thought he's a Christian, so we didn't need to have any agreements and things like that. What do you say about that? Can a Christian do business with an unbeliever? Is that gonna mess their deal up? Are they being unequally yoked? You know, what's your view on that?
Well, my views are very simple. You know, never trust a person, trust an agreement.
Right.
So make sure that before you start, you've got sound agreements. And
Right.
it's not realistic to be in this earth and not do business with non-Christians.
Right.
You know, there are individuals that are non-Christians that have more integrity than most Christians I know. There are still men in the world that come into agreement with a handshake and they'll go through with the agreement. And yet there are Christians who will sign an agreement and will default on the signed agreement. And so from my view, if you are, for example, into petroleum oil products, it's almost inevitable you'll be doing business with a non-Christian. You know, you have to do your due diligence. You have to make sure that the company's sound. You have to make sure that that company has a good reputation, that individual has a good reputation, and sign agreements and have a stack of lawyers on your side to make sure that you are protected, as I'm sure they will. I think many Christians are extremely naive. Luke chapter number 16 tells us that. It says in verse 11 that the children of this world are wiser in their generation than the children of light. And he says, because the unjust, crooked manager did the right thing. He went to his friends and he used their system. When Christians have a system and we don't use our system, you know. And the thing is that I don't know too many Christian multimillionaires. I met a couple of billionaires, but all their money is not going to help the needs in Africa. And, you know, they're not going to be doing business with mom and pop businesses in Africa, you know. So you're going to have to, if you want to be in the ocean, you've got to get out of the fish tank. And if you really want to swim, you've got to go to the deep. And you're going to find all kinds of juggernauts there of individuals who own, probably they could own almost all of Africa if they wanted to buy it. And those are the kinds of people business with, because, you know, they eagles, they don't fuss about small things. They flying high, they think big, they think out of the box. They have innovation and creative departments that are unbelievable. I was in San Jose and I went to visit Facebook. 10 years ago, it was just a piece of dirt. Now they're employing 20,000 people. It's 24 hours a day. I mean, it's round the clock.
Yeah.
And they have 24-hour chefs, 10 different types of meals you want to eat anytime. It never sleeps. People from all over the world. There's no clothing ethic. You can wear shorts, slippers, ride a bicycle, walk with a scooter, you know. The whole ethic has changed, you know. And if you are going to, if you're not going to do business with people like that, then you're going to be stuck selling wood on the side of the road. And so our mind has to change.
Yeah.
Our culture has to change. African
Right.
culture
Right.
I'm not against Wombela Ring and spending the whole day greeting,
Yeah.
but you've lost hours just greeting, you know, just, yeah, Makadi, da, 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 the whole day. By that time, the drone has delivered the goods to Zambia and is back for another load. You're still there
Right.
on the
Right.
floor,
Right.
And so
Right.
some of those things have to
Have to
change.
change.
And then
Right.
the hierarchical systems we have, where, we still honor. I flew from Lusaka to Addis one afternoon, and Chichi was with me. And President Kaunda came sit right in front of us. We were in seat 2A and B, and we
Right.
put him in seat 1A. And so we
Right.
greeted him, and he allowed us to take a picture. And then the Prime Minister came. He was the last on, and he sat on the other side of
Right.
row 1. Then after
Right.
they served the meal, and we were at cruising altitude, the Prime Minister came and knelt down and was almost on his face, talking to the old man
Right.
and asking for permission to run the country.
Okay.
I said, there's the problem. There's the problem right there. We're so
Right.
stuck on culture and hierarchical stuff. When you've got
Right.
kids studying in a garage,
Yeah.
riding a skateboard and becoming
Changing the world.
So
Right.
the whole psychic has to change.
Right.
Africa's exposure has to change. We
Right.
have to learn that there's a lot to go around for everybody. We can all make money,
Right. Right.
and
Right.
that, you're right, the psychic and the culture has got to change dramatically. There needs to
Right.
be a real shock thing that changes us around.
Right. Right. I think you saw right, Bishop, and it's a mindset shift completely. And and the beauty about it is nobody's mind is caged. There's no license to thinking, there's no restrictions to dreaming and creating, and one has to confront those fears that are naturally are ingrained into an African child, that you can't, and you're not capable. The world is too big. It belongs to others. There has to be a confronting of those natural inclinations and fears, and beginning to dream of the possibilities and the things that can be done on the global stage. And right now the playing field is so open, because anybody can go online. You can create a software right now. It cuts across borders and governments and all these regulations, and you can literally begin a trade with the world. And so there has to be an understanding of the landscape, that the landscape has changed. We are in a digital age, and the tools that require success are different. It's not the same tools. It's not the same processes. And so I think you're so right, Bishop. This is really, really amazing. And Bishop, I want to just ask you, I've got just probably about 2 more questions before we wrap up. Now, you've been advising governments, and I know you've been playing an advisory role around the world with different heads of state and leaders, to try and see, because, was it John Maxwell who said that, any organization rises and falls on leadership. Now, what are some of the things that you would want to say to maybe government leaders that are listening here, or entrepreneurs that are listening that are in a position of leadership? What's the advice that you would want to give from a leadership point of view?
I think the most important thing for me is transparency and integrity. Africans are not transparent and a little low on integrity. Those two are very important, because transparency and integrity build the one important thing, and that's trust.
Right.
If there's no trust, your product isn't worth anything.
Right.
If Rolls-Royce sells you a car and they put a 25-year guarantee on that engine, you can trust those boys. If Mercedes-Benz puts 200,000 kilometers before its first service, you can trust them because they have transparency and they have integrity.
Right.
And those are the things that we're short on our continent. You know, there has to be integrity and transparency, and both of them can be learned.
Right.
It can be taught. Transparency and integrity can be taught. They are taught by someone being an example, and also it can be taught as a class. You know, most of what we learn is in the way of sciences and in the academic sciences and so on. But you hardly ever get a class ever that teaches character. There's no class that teaches character. And so there has to be individuals who are trained, the do's and the don'ts of leadership. You know, corruption is killing our country. It's killing Africa. And, you know, if you vote another government in, you might as well have the same one, because this next government is coming to eat their share. It's our turn to eat, as it were. And they don't care if they damage a business, crash an economy, create hyperinflation where money is worthless. We had like 25 quadrillion dollars in our bank in 2008. And when they finally gave us what it was worth, it was $5 American. No apology, no apology. No, guys, this was a very bad time. We made some mistakes, and they're making the same mistakes now because there's no transparency, there's no integrity, and therefore there's no trust. So people don't put their money in banks because there's no trust. Why would I want to? Years ago, people would say, you buy something that's from China, it's going to break. People wouldn't trust Chinese goods. They'd say, buy something from Britain or from the States because they make better goods. So trust is what we're getting to. We have to move to trust. And so the new entrepreneur has to build integrity and build trust. So if you are doing a delivery service, if you're delivering goods, make sure that it's delivered on time, make sure that it's delivered even before time, done well, and the job is done well. And once you become trusted, you become a household name. If you deliver a good product, generally it's around trust. What Warren Buffett did, he bought shares and the bank went under that was part of his conglomerate. And the bank went under by $2 billion. And I think it's Hathaway. I think that's the name of his company.
Yeah, Hathaway.
Yeah. He assumed that. He said, it's my responsibility. I'll pay the depositors their money because this is my responsibility. I won't file for liquidation. I think it was Section 11 or something. I'll take responsibility. And from that time, people trust Warren Buffett. If he says that, you can take it to the bank.
Wow.
And so that has to be built. It has to be built. It mustn't just be a word. It's not an anthem. It must be who we are, inside and outside. You know? And that's the same with Jesus. Can you trust Jesus? Yes, he's transparent, he's honest, he's a man of integrity. You can take it to the bank.
Wow.
Can you trust? You see, and the key about it is trust. Can you trust your leader? Can you trust your et cetera, And African leaders need to come up with that. They borrow money from China and so on, and the Chinese know they're not going to pay it back. They don't want to pay it back. They don't intend to pay it back. So we can manipulate them, and we can take their property, or we'll just show them more money, and we can do what we want, you know. And then the second thing is respect. You know, we must respect the people we employ by giving them decent salaries, giving them good working conditions, good healthcare packages. You know, people will go to the end of the world for you when they know my boss respects me, because he does for me, I will do for him. Those are very, very, very key issues. And in Africa, labor is not respected, you know. and people that are in work don't actually respect the job because their employees don't respect them.
Wow, wow. That's so deep, Bishop. You know, the issue of trust is so profound, and it can't be overemphasized, you know. And when I think about that issue of trust, I mean, I look at it even at a local level, or when you think of putting money in a bank, the chances are you're gonna choose the one that you trust the most, you know.
Right.
And that's why even some of the leaders end up taking money to Switzerland. It's because of the trust element. They trust, not that it's right, but they trust Switzerland more than they trust some other country in Bujumbura or somewhere else.
Right.
It boils down to trust, whether it's at a micro level or macro level, which kind of company you partner with. It boils down to trust, which government you do business with. There are certain countries that business people will not touch because they don't trust those countries. You
Right.
know, it's not even that those countries don't have resources. They may have the most resources more than any other country, but it's an element of trust that actually plays a big factor. So I think that's a big one. That's a very big one. Yeah, yeah. And Bishop, lastly, I just want to ask you about, you know, partnerships. You know, I think that's one thing that I think, you know, I found to be very important, because, you know, at some stage as Africans, we have to be honest with ourselves and say, you know, we sometimes don't have everything that's needed to get to the next level, and you know, and so what happens is there's a continuous vicious cycle, and end up you having people that end up cheating other people because they're battling for these little resources, instead of creating a partnership model where everybody wins, you know, and a win-win model, and then building on that. And I think you touched a little bit. Can you just tell us your views and thoughts on that?
If individuals are going into partnership, if they are spending the money before any money has been made, it's a bad one already.
Right.
I was listening to some guys talking about going into partnership. One was he was a pattern maker and worked in a foundry. Another guy was a fitter and turner, and the other guy was an electrician. And they were going to put their skills together. But instead of looking how they could gel as a partnership, you know, and the kind of money they would need, they were already talking about the product and how they would split the money when it was made, when they hadn't started a single day. They didn't do any of their due diligence on things like taxation, registering a company, opening a bank account, transportation, premises, none of that. And from day one, it was doomed to fail. And they had such a massive fallout to where they became cardinal enemies from the beginning. Partnership is God's idea. He put man and woman together. In every sphere of life, they are partners, and they can work together, should work together. It's possible to do so. The three things that I want to say about a partnership: the first one, every partnership must be held by, firstly, a very strong agreement.
Right.
Everybody must be happy that agreement was put together. Each partner with a lawyer that can individually protect one side, the other one side, and say, no, this is good. And when they shake hands, they must be genuine, that this is a genuine partnership. If the guys are married, I would encourage them to get a feeling from the wife. You know, what do you feel about this? You know, do you feel good about it? Do you feel like this is a good thing, or do you feel uneasy? If the wife is uneasy, listen to the wife, because sometimes the wives are right. You know. Thirdly, if it depends on who you are, some guys don't take it seriously, but I do. I'm not in partnership with anyone. I just work with my boys, and we are in covenant together. You know, what's mine is theirs, what's theirs is mine. We've shaken hands on it. We have sound documentation as to who gets what, but we are in some sort of a covenant. Right. And if you're in a partnership where a man and a woman is ready to go into some sort of a covenant, and they take that seriously, where you pledge, I'll never hurt you, I'll never malign you, I'll be honest with you and straightforward with you. That's the kind of partnership I'm looking for. You know, if you need something, I'm with you. But if you have a partnership of people that are just totally different, one has a farm, this one has skill as a farmer, and that's all they have in common. Generally, those kinds of things don't work out because they're going to fight along the way. Somebody's going to feel cheated, and people will be bad friends, you know. And we partners with God. You know, I'm his partner. I'm his partner here on earth, and I hope I'm doing a good job. He's doing his part as supplying my need, but I'm looking after his church, and I believe I'm in covenant with God. You know, there's a lot of things he doesn't tell me. He knows everything about me, which is unfair. But there are times when I desperately need things, and I'll ask him as my partner, strictly using that terminology, to help me. Chichi and I are partners in business. We're husband and wife, but we run business. We're a partnership, and we try to be as transparent as possible. But partnerships must be really looked at very clearly, because too many very good friends have become bad friends and arch enemies because they didn't decide early who gets what, when, and where.
Right. That's so profound, you know. And like the saying goes, you know, a piece of paper has got a longer term memory than all of us, you know. And if anybody forgets or develops amnesia along the route, you know, they can always go back to the paper and get reminded on what was actually agreed.
Very true. I like the way that's put. Very good.
Yeah. Or if somebody decides or finds themselves accidentally in heaven, those who are left on earth can actually go and refer to what was discussed and so on. Those who are left with the responsibility. Yes. So it's so important. And actually, when you look at some of the communities and races that have succeeded, you know, with their challenges and so on. You talked about the Jewish community. There's a kind of a camaraderie, partnership, quote unquote, culture that's built around exchange of goods, services, money, and so on. Yeah, and that leads them to become more powerful and more successful than others, you know. So that's so powerful. No, Bishop, thank you so much.
Just one comment, Walter, let me make. I don't go into business personally with any of our church members. I've been in business with people that are not church members. I particularly don't, because something can go wrong. It then impedes the pulpit, you know, because you might have to deal with a situation that could include something similar that you're going to, you know. And as a pastor, I never borrow money from members of our church, and I don't lend money to people in church, because if you have to deal with something as a subject, it becomes a problem, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
That's powerful there, and that has to be a general rule, I think, as advice. If we got any pastors listening, I think that's good advice. You know, you end up throwing the baby with the water if something goes wrong, and more times than not, there's going to be a dispute about something, and you know, then you don't want people walking different directions in a service, you know, when we're supposed to be worshiping, you know, just because of a transaction that didn't work. So that's so important. Thank you, Bishop. And I think entrepreneurs, there's so much that you've heard today, and I hope you've been taking notes. I mean, Bishop gave us 2 books that you need to look up for and go and read. One by George Clason, The Richest Man in Babylon. The other one, The Jewish Phenomenon. You know, if you can find those 2 books and read them. Like I said, I've also got my book now that's out. You can get it on lulu.com, The Secrets to Riches. And so it's all about knowledge and information and building our capacity to win, you know. And in a couple of weeks, we're launching our online university where you're going to have courses. Bishop spoke about, you know, courses that deal with boardroom etiquette and things that are not typically taught within the academia. So we deal with that in our institution. So you'll be able to get empowered there. So Bishop, thank you so much. You know, we really love you. We send our love to Chichi and the family there in Zimbabwe. And thank you for taking the time to speak to us. And we were really enriched. And thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Mandaza. God bless you. All the best with your endeavors.
Thank you, sir.
You will excel and do well. God bless you.
Yes, thank you.
Join me this Sunday for yet another exciting session with a world changer. These programs are designed to bring the best in the world to empower you for your success. People that have made a difference in the area of sports, entertainment, politics, social media, in the area of just general knowledge, you know, through their experience. So I don't want you to miss it, because we've assembled the best of the best. For the first time, you can interact with them and ask them questions, find out how they made it, be in the same Zoom chat with them, and get to have a one-on-one experience. People that you may have seen on TV and thought you'll never be able to ask them a question directly. Well, this is your chance. Join us this Sunday at 6 p.m. on Zoom.